The typical workflow for feature films here at Yellow Cab would be to start with conformed production sound. Okay, usually there'll be one dialogue editor and maybe 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the movie, sound editors. And there are also different steps which are Foley recording, ADR, and then of course the final mix. What we do all that within Nuendo. Okay, so it's really our main tool when we handle a complete post-production package for a movie. So dialogue editors, they'll be doing obviously all the cleaning up of the dialogue, removing boom noise, and maybe trying to look for alts, which is actually quite easy when you start getting used to Media Bay, which is Nuendo's integrated sound base, because you can search with metadata. And so search, for example, for scene 23, take 1, and then you can see all the other takes that there are for that scene. So it's quite quick to actually pass through different takes and say, okay, this one will work, this one will work. Then you just import it in, and that goes quite fast. Obviously, there's always Reconform, which is ready to follow the latest cut. So if we need to update our sound edit or dialogue edit to the latest cut, we can do that quickly. For sound editing, there are lots of cool tools in Nuendo that we often use. It's a great general DAW to do sound in. You can use samplers, for example. We use Contact frequently, but I know you can also use the sampler track, things like that. It's very efficient, for example, for editing Foley, where you can just slide a footstep around inside the clip, which is a bit more time-consuming and not as precise when you're in another system. The plugins that are in Nuendo are very good, and VST-free third-party plugins usually offer a very good choice of plugins. I mean, there's really no lack of choice in terms of plugins. One of the interesting features of Nuendo, it's not actually a feature, but it's the way it works, is that it can be used with a very cost-effective server. We're often working 3 or 4 sound editors at the same time on one project, and to have all the media, all the data in one place on one server and not working off local drives makes things much simpler when you're trying to handle a big project.
Well, hello, welcome to spring. Sort of welcome to spring, depending on where you are in the country. Welcome to Steinberg Sessions. I'm in a particularly good mood tonight because we have a fantastic guest. You know, a couple months ago, CBG was here, lives in Winnipeg. He said, hey, Chris said, hey, you got to meet my friend Kevon. Kevon is a film and TV composer. So I called up Kevon. We talked like for hours and hours and hours. I wish I had actually recorded all of our conversations because you would have probably learned as much as I did just talking to him about stuff. But anyway, he's here tonight. We have a session, which is going to be pretty awesome to check it out. Like I said in the ad, for those of you that saw the ad, I've never seen anything like this. I've been working with Cubase and Nuendo for, I don't know, 25 years. And I've never seen a session that looks like this. I was actually quite overwhelmed first time I saw it. But Kevon is here to break it down for us. And of all nights that we could be talking, it had to be tonight. I'm a hockey fan, for those that know me. This guy, Kevon, is a hockey fan. And my team is the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know. Don't save the comments. I know. It's like I know. We don't even have to go there. Kevon is a Winnipeg Jets fan. And for those that haven't been following hockey this year, the Leafs have been pretty good. They've actually been sort of winning, sort of in first place for most of the year until they met the Winnipeg Jets and this hellebuck goalie guy who stopped them dead in their tracks. And now I'm scared, and my good mood tonight could change based on the outcome of this game, which just happens to be on a screen right over here, just so I can keep track of it, because you know, Kevin, I'm planning to give you a hard time every time the Leafs score tonight. Just saying.
Yeah, I expect nothing less from a Leafs fan, I'll tell you that.
So what do you what do you have to say about this? Like, what are we doing here? We should be watching. We should actually be having
We should have the game on. We should have the game
maybe
on.
we should
if
just
only.
maybe we should skip all this music stuff. Just broadcast the game. Kevin and I will pour a beverage and we'll just talk about. No, we won't do that. As much as I would like to do that, we won't do that. But if you have any hockey questions, not only is Kevin an expert on film and TV composing, he's also an expert on hockey, and in particular, the Winnipeg Jets. So
I try.
no, well, I know I can verify this because we had some really good conversations. Like, I'm kind of just one of the annoying Leaf guys that only knows about my own team. Kevin knows about all the teams, and he was telling me how it was. So really, this is probably why the Jets keep beating us, because we're so narrow focused and whatever. Anyway, hi Kevin, welcome, welcome to Steinberg Sessions. Thanks for being here tonight. Man, there's so much to get into, and so you guys can see. I think in which corner? It's that corner, that one right there. You can see the session, and it's so crazy, and I'm excited to.
And that's simplified too, right?
That's the simplified one. Yeah, we don't even have all the instruments. We just have the audio renders of everything. But your music is stunning, and
thank you.
Man, your process is super inspiring and interesting, especially to me. I was super inspired by it. And actually, we'll get to it later, but you've actually changed the destiny of a song I'm working on right now. So thank you for that. I'll tell you about that later. But
hey, list me as a co-writer, and
we'll get you the co-write. It's all good. Anyway, so how did you get into this, man? Like how did you start? Like this is one of those areas of music that a lot of people, myself included, are a little afraid of, because we do these little 3-minute pop song things, but you do these like long form, like 2-hour masterpieces. Like, how did you get into this?
it all started when I was about 13 years old, and I went to a film with my sister, and just the music and the picture blew me away. And I realized at that age the power that music combined with film has. And from that point on, I was like, I want to do that. So I stuck with my piano lessons, doing everything I didn't love to do, but worked hard, and went to school, studied composition and a bit of music technology, and then I did a master's in film scoring down south at Columbia College Chicago. And then I began the slow journey, climbing the ladder, working for other composers, orchestrating, grabbing coffee, doing late night tech support till 5 a.m. in some who knows where studio. And now recently I've been lucky enough to be building up my name and getting my credits and my name and work out there, and now I'm happily doing what I wanted to do since I was 13, so I'm very fortunate.
Amazing, man. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm happy for you. It's you deserve it. Your work is brilliant. But so talk about the schooling a little bit, because as someone that sort of didn't go down that road, I always just assumed that film composer, TV composer, you do one of two things. You're either like super into the synthesizer kind of sound effecty stuff, and you kind of go that way. Or you do kind of an orchestral, sort of traditional orchestral, learning counterpoint, learning arranging, learning orchestration, and what's film scoring school like? Like, what kinds of things are you learning?
Well, once I'd done my bachelor's, which was a much more traditional, much more traditional music education.
So was that just like a Bachelor of Music? Is that what that was?
Yeah, that was a Bachelor of Music. I went to Acadia out east.
Okay.
And so once I'd done that, and I'd studied some music tech because I knew that was going to be important, I ended up going to Chicago to study film scoring. And so when I was there, I really had my eyes opened up to different musical languages that you really have to utilize, from jazz to electronics. I mean, you really have to be able to do it all. I'm not blessed to be a rock star.
Not,
So
not many of us
I
are.
very much right, right, yeah. So I very much had and continue to need to be a chameleon and be able to tackle all sorts of different approaches. So whether it's a very electronic score, where they want something in the style of a Trent Reznor, to something much more traditional and orchestral, like the Christmas music that I've done. You very much have to be able to do everything, and to just have those tools in the toolbox to pull them out when you need them.
So are they teaching you all these styles and all these different things that you have to do in film score school, or is this just like you're learning stuff outside of it and you're bringing it into class because you have to know all this stuff?
Well, it's a little bit of both, right? In school, we definitely studied, jazz and electronic and music and how to orchestrate and how to notate and how to prepare music for scoring sessions, how to conduct, how to approach different genres of music. If somebody wants something in the style of Jerry Goldsmith, then you kind of know what they want. If they want something in the style of Hans or Trent Reznor or whomever it may be, then you have a very good idea of the type of musical language and the instrumentation and the orchestration that you'd use to give the director, the producer, what they're looking for, while still giving your own twist on things.
Very cool. So there's a tech component to the education as well. Like, you're learning all these traditional things. What was the tech component of learning this stuff like? Like, did they actually take you through the process of scoring a film, or do they just expect that you know a sequencer and some audio stuff and that's good enough?
At the very beginning, you start with, okay, what is a DAW? A digital audio workstation. How do you program MIDI? How do you set up a template? How do you record audio? How do you mix? How do you deliver? How do you stem for your mix engineer? How do you deliver it to the stage? It's very much building from the ground up.
Very cool.
And
So
that's very important.
so you graduate, and like, how do you like? Where do you like? Where do you start? How do you find your first gig or your internship, or like, do you write music and submit to music libraries, or like how does this happen?
All of the above. Really, I was fortunate enough to intern with some great composers and to work with some other ones, and to really see it from the beginning, the nitty gritty of what you need to do, from running the studio day to day to doing tech support, office work, and you basically slowly make your way up. So I started out and I was doing coffee runs. I was doing orchestrating till 3 a.m. before a recording session, sleeping at the studio. Like, I was grinding it out, and that's really what it takes at the start.
So are these studios where you're doing this interning, are these like the same recording studios that people are making rock and roll records in, or are these specifically like film score studios?
Well, most of the studios that are doing film scores are actually kind of more of a cottage industry. They're more of composers working from home, having their own setups at home. They might have their own studio, their own little separate building. But one of the composers that I worked for had a setup with a whole bunch of other composers. It was almost like a campus just filled with music. You ran into different musicians and composers and all sorts of interesting people coming in and out of there. So I was really fortunate enough to kind of see how things worked, and you never knew who you were going to run into any day. So it was pretty inspiring.
Very cool. And did you meet some of your heroes? And, part two to the question is, like, are each of these little studios, did they specialize in one type of film score, or is all the stuff happening in each of these studios?
It's funny, like, I don't think any composer wants to be pigeonholed or known for just doing one specific style, but depending on the film that they're attached to that becomes known, then people around town, around LA or around the world, will then approach those composers to do something in the style of, so whether it's a composer doing a comedy or that becomes big, or a drama. Usually it's building off of that credit that helps them to build their career. But again, a lot of these guys are trying to work on various projects, because if they continue to work on the same style all the time, they get a little run down.
So has this happened to you? Like your IMDb is pretty crazy long, and so you've obviously done lots of work. Like, have you been sort of? Or do people expect one thing from you at this point, or?
Well, they definitely take a look at my IMDb, and hopefully that they can see I can do various types of films. But it's funny, like during specific times of the year, they'll be producing all the Christmas movies so that they're ready for a specific date, or they'll be doing, kind of the autumn romance movies at a specific time of the year. So, when everyone's out enjoying the sunshine in June and July, I'm stuck in my basement working on Christmas tunes.
How does that feel? Is that weird to be your friends are tanning and you're shaking sleigh
I tell them
bells?
I'm working on my studio tan. Like
Amazing. That's very
people
cool.
tell me to get some sun, and I'm like, yeah, I wish.
Awesome. So, so do you have a favorite kind of film that you like to work on? If because it sounds like you've worked on a few different kinds. I mean, you're known, I guess, for a lot of these Christmas movies, but do you have a favorite kind of film that you like to work on, or a favorite style of music?
No, I, I think I said during one of our conversations that my favorite film is always the next one I'm about to work on. That moment before you think, oh my goodness, how am I going to get this done? But right around that time when you're celebrating because you've got the project, and you're starting to think about ideas and brainstorm in your head. So that's, I'm always looking for the next challenge. And as long as I'm able to challenge myself, and the films are able to challenge me, and the directors and producers are able to do the same, I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing.
Very cool. Okay, so for those that haven't done this and maybe are interested, and let's dig into the process. So you get the gig, and do you get a script? Do you get what do you get?
Yeah, I mean, I would say about 50 to 60% of the time I do get a script ahead of time. So I'll read that. I'll try and brainstorm ideas in my mind about different characters and different themes that I might want to have. Then I'll often have a conversation with the director or the producer about what they're looking for, their favorite style of music and what they're interested in. And then I will try and sit down at the piano over there, and I'll try and come up with different themes and different motifs that represent the characters or the emotions, or something that I want to add to the story that isn't necessarily on the screen.
Very cool. So, you start this, you're writing themes, like how many, is there an average number of themes per picture that you're doing? And part two to that is, I mean, are these just melodies, or do they have chords with them? Like talk about that part of it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the genre of film and the way the preference that the director or the producer might have for the style of music that they're looking for. So if I know that a film is temped with Trent Reznor, for example, then I know that they're kind of looking for a more electronic, textural approach to things with simplified themes or motifs that might have some dissonance to them. That gives me an idea in terms of instrumentation too, of what I might do. And then what I also like to do is I like to think of bringing on either different musicians or specific sounds that I want to incorporate into the film. For example, I did a thriller last year, and I called up a buddy of mine from college, and I knew he had his own homemade synth modular system at home.
Wow.
And I was looking for a really gritty electronic sound, and I thought, well, this guy would be perfect, and I want to work with him. And so I had him record a whole bunch of different sounds and put together a custom library of sounds. that I could then use for this film to give it its own distinct voice and character.
Cool. And so the sounds, like, are these just like atonal, moody sounds he's sending you? Is that?
Well, usually what I request is often you need certain types of sounds, like you might need some drones that have some movement to them.
Okay.
You might need some tension there, so minor seconds or tritones, things of that nature. You might want some rhythms in there. So for that film, I was specifically looking for things in kind of offbeat rhythms, things in 5/4, 7/8 that were off kilter. And that would kind of repeat, but you couldn't quite put your finger on when they were repeating.
Right. Very cool.
And that was just all to add tension to the film.
Very cool. So it sounds to me like the sound palettes are a function of, like, it's not a predefined sound palette. It seems to be up to you, but it seems to be sort of part and parcel of the direction that the director tells you they want the film. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you visualize it as kind of a box that you have, whether it's something that the director wants or the genre of film, and then you try and push that box a little bit and kind of make your own sound while still delivering what they're looking for.
So how often, like, some of these, like some of your deadlines are pretty crazy from our conversation before. So how often, like, I'm assuming you tend to take more sonic risks when you have more time, but how often, when you're on a tight timeline, does it happen that you submit the music and it comes back, no, we don't like that sound, we want you to redo this whole thing? Like, does that happen often, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the client that you're working with and what they're looking for and how many people you're answering to. I mean, you're not just writing music for yourself. You're very much writing music for somebody else's project, and so, you go as hard as you need to deliver what they're looking for. I did one film last year. I wrote it in 13 days, which was ridiculous.
How long is it? Like, this is like a 2-hour film?
Yeah, well, I think it was around 50, 55 minutes of music.
Wow.
And there were probably 4 or 5 revisions on a lot of the cues. So, it's just having your tricks, knowing the modes that you need to use, knowing the melodies. Like, as long as you've got really solid themes for a film, then you've got good material that you can use throughout that film. And that's why it's so important to really think ahead of time about what you're going to do. Because, when you get tight deadlines, you don't have time to mess around. You have to deliver.
So we'll come back to the modes, because this was a big theme that we talked about a lot in our own thing. And Derek, I just got a message from JG. You've got some questions. We'll get to you. But I'm feeling this train of thought here, so we're going to carry on for a second.
Keep it going.
We'll come back to here, yeah. So you talk about composing themes at the piano. I always sort of had this image in my head of, I got the job, I'm working on this film, I get the video, I load it into my DAW, and I just start working with Cubase, and I'm doing my thing. It sounds like there's a fair amount of work between, your themes at the piano, your buddy making some sound design elements for you on his modular synth. It sounds like a fair amount of work happens away from the workstation. Is that fair to say? Is that typical?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to do that because when you're working on a number of films, you tend to fall into habits, compositional habits, and some of that is what somebody might call, your sound, your typical sound that they might expect. But at the same time, I know I want to keep pushing myself compositionally and sound design and mixing. But I know that I don't want the picture to dictate everything, because it's really important to have a good marriage between the picture and the music, but not to have the music slave to the picture. You need to be able to tell kind of more about what's unsaid about the film. And to do that, you really need to kind of live and breathe the ideas and the emotions away from the film before you actually sit down to do the work.
Okay, so this brings me to a thing that I'm most curious about, because I tend to like very dialogue-driven films, more so than some of the more modern, action-y, effect-y films. I love what you just mentioned about how you're trying to, with the music, say things that aren't necessarily being said with the pictures and the actors. Can you talk a little bit about the dialogue and the interaction between the dialogue and the music? Like, is that a thing that you think about, or am I just trying to create something here that doesn't exist?
Hey, that's what happens when you're talking to a Leafs fan. No.
Oh, okay, that's one for you, but I'm coming back at you. Anyway, sorry.
No, I mean, dialogue is very important. Dialogue is king. Dialogue, in terms of ranking, I would always say dialogue, music, and sound effects, depending on the type of film. Now, with dialogue, you have to be very careful not to step on dialogue, especially when somebody's just starting a phrase or an important piece of dialogue. So if you have music coming in at the exact same time as somebody begins talking, that can often be a bit of a conflict. You also need to keep in mind the range of the instruments and the density of your orchestration. I wouldn't want to have a really dense, really complex orchestration with a whole lot of different things going on, while two people are intimately speaking to each other in a candlelit room at night. That the music would be very distracting from the picture and from the dialogue, and that's the major first rule: is you don't distract from the dialogue. But when you're writing, if you simplify things, you can simplify your orchestration. You can still hint at your themes, and that's an important approach that you can take during dialogue, is to have simplified versions of themes playing underneath. They might be longer held notes, but if somebody were to go back and to listen to that into that section instead of listening to the dialogue, they might be able to go, oh yeah, I can see, or I can hear the theme in here. And that's always something I strive for, is to not just kind of lean on notes and not to oversimplify things, but to still have somewhat musical experience going on, so that if people want to hear something or go back and take a listen, then they can actually hear some music going on.
Cool. Okay, we're going to get to some of the tech stuff here, and Derek has some questions. His questions are technical in nature, mixing, mastering stuff. But before we get into the Cubase part of our program, you mentioned modes. Now, I've got a little graphic here. For those of you that don't know what modes are, think of it like if you're on a keyboard and you just play the white notes from C to C, that's the Ionian mode. If you play it from D to D, that's Dorian mode. So you're just playing white notes, and they're basically different scales. But you use them. You don't think of them as scales, Kevin. You think of these things as colors. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, they're very much building blocks that you can use to give yourself a starting point. So whether you're approaching a scene, you're not starting from scratch every single time. There are always kind of tropes that have been used in either previous Christmas movies or previous thrillers or horror movies, whatever it may be, that you can kind of dig out of your toolbox. So, for example, in Christmas movies, a lot of people will hear the Lydian mode, which is the fourth one down. And this mode often denotes something magical happening. So, the next time you go to watch a Christmas movie, and if you have a magical Christmas character come on screen, you're probably going to hear that Lydian mode, with that raised fourth. It's a brighter mode. It feels very happy and magical, and that's one of those tools that I like to pull out as a composer to kind of ground the audience
So
and the emotion.
what's the mode for a horror movie? Which one do you use for
Ooh,
that?
well, I would actually go with scales. I'd go with something like the octatonic scale, where you have a lot of minor seconds against each other. You have a lot of tension and a lot of resolution, and that often the octatonic scale is a great starting point for kind of actiony movies and horror. I mean, minor seconds and minor ninths and tritones are always handy and ready to go.
So superhero movies, what am I using for that?
You're using jumps of a fifth.
Okay.
You're going from like a G to a C. Like superhero films, it's often another way to think about the melodies too is in terms of shapes. So you might have a line where the note's staying the same. You might have a softer kind of a circle, which is kind of stepwise motion. Or you might have something more like a square, which is where you have those big jumps of a fifth. So that's often kind of the heroic sound that you'd get.
I find this so interesting, man, because I just never thought of these kinds of things. Modes for me as a jazz student coming up were just these scales for improvisation and these kind of collections of sounds. But to actually assign these kind of theoretical ideas to specific types of movie genres and sounds is just it's so mind-blowing for me. I could talk to you all night about that, but let's move on. Why Cubase?
Cubase is such a powerful program. I think of it as kind of the brain to my setup. It's so good for handling MIDI. It's really good for handling audio too. It's really intuitive for both. I'm so familiar with it, with the shortcuts that I can use, that I can work really fast in it, which is very important. And Steinberg's always trying to add great features. Like in Cubase 11, I know that there's a new stemming feature, which looks really powerful, and I'm very much looking forward to saving some time stemming films with those features. So it's all three of those things: the audio, the MIDI, and constantly trying to push things forward that really make my life a lot easier.
So have you been using Cubase since you started this, or have you been on a bit of a journey and come back to Cubase?
Yeah, well, I actually started out on Logic years ago. I bought a Mac, and Logic seemed like the thing to use. Back then, it wasn't actually owned by Apple. It was owned by eMagic, which has since been sold to Apple.
Yeah.
And then in my undergrad, I was introduced to Cubase and Pro Tools. During my master's, we were using Logic, and then when I started working my way up and working for other composers, I started to use Cubase because that was what a lot of them were using. So I had to be familiar with the tools. So I sat down and went through as many tutorials as I could, and now I couldn't see myself using anything else.
So there's a lot of film, TV composers using Cubase. It sounds like. Is it one of the more popular programs for that? Is that what you found?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
But you don't use it kind of the way we do. Like we talked a little bit about where you host your virtual instruments, and do you want to talk a little bit about Vienna Ensemble Pro?
Yeah, so I host most of my virtual instruments inside Vienna Ensemble Pro, and the way it connects to Cubase is through VST plugins. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to host these fairly processor-intensive sample libraries outside of Cubase. I have the audio routed back into Cubase so that I can mix within Cubase, and I do all my sound design in Cubase as well. So whether it's time stretching something or pitching it down a couple of octaves. I do my sound design in Cubase.
For those of you that aren't familiar with it, I had heard of it, but I didn't really know how it worked, and I since did some investigation. I have a video with a walkthrough of it that will play on the way out, just for those of you that are interested to hang
Perfect.
around. It's about 10 minutes of video in it, but it gives you a good overview of what Kevin's talking about. But basically what this is it's kind of like a virtual instrument and mix shell that can live outside of Cubase, that can be routed back into Cubase. And it can actually live on the same computer, or you can actually have it on two different computers and then just connect the computers with an Ethernet cable. So if you're using pretty intensive virtual instruments, which I assume you are, Kevin, I'm assuming your string libraries
Just a little bit.
are pretty big. You could actually, do you host it on another computer, or is yours all on one?
You know what? I used to.
Okay.
I've since upgraded my computer, and I've gone to one computer now, hosting everything. And so far, it's been really good.
But you have a ridiculously new fast computer, correct?
I do, and a whole lot of RAM. I'm running about 256 gigs of RAM.
Amazing. That's a lot of RAM. Anyway, well, that's amazing. But you did have we won't get into it too much, but a cautionary tale. You had a bit of a run-in with Big Sur, the new Mac OS.
Yeah. Make sure you're on the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge.
Gotcha. Okay.
Of technology.
We'll take that one offline. But anyway, yeah. So you're running Catalina now. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I am running. What am I running? Yeah, I'm running Mac OS Catalina, and it's moving along well.
Okay,
and I don't think I'll be changing that anytime soon.
And which, just so for the folks here, are you at Cubase 11 yet, or are you still?
You know, I've just started playing around with Cubase 11. I haven't had a chance to use it on a project yet, but my template's loaded up and ready to go.
Amazing, cool. How is it so far for you? It's good.
It's fun. Yeah, like I said, I'm looking forward to that stemming. The stemming is huge.
Yeah, the export stuff. We've talked about that in other sessions. So for those of you that want to learn a little bit more about that, I talked about that in the January and the NAMM one a little bit, and I think even the one prior to that as well. But a very, very cool feature. Okay, so you have Vienna Ensemble Pro as a separate thing, and you're not even running, like you work to picture, correct? Like they send you video to work to? Okay. And so when they send you the video, you're not even using that in Cubase. You're running that off a separate piece of software?
Yeah. I've got it in a piece of software called Video Slave. And what that piece of software allows me to do is load up, a number of different cuts. It syncs via MIDI time code. It allows me to load up a number of different dialogue tracks. If I really wanted to, I could take that piece of software and run it on a different computer entirely, which is also fairly common for composers to do, is to have a small dedicated computer, maybe a Mac Mini or whatever it is, just to host video, so that's not also being put on the processor while you're working.
Very cool. So as you can all tell, you need some big computers to do what Kevin does over here. Okay, but if I'm starting out and I want to get into this, what do I need?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, basically, since computers are becoming cheaper and cheaper, you can get some pretty good computers at a decent price. You need a good DAW, so Cubase is wonderful because you can use it on PC and Mac. You need some kind of an instrument to control your virtual instruments. So I've got a keyboard sitting in front of me that I use. And I'd suggest a microphone so you can record your ideas, and you just need some time to really dedicate to checking out all the neat things you can do.
Okay, can we dig into this crazy session? I almost had a heart attack the first time I saw this thing. So let's take a look at that. I'm over here now. All right, here we go. Kevin, there's a lot of marker tracks and
Yeah.
like groups and like
Mhm.
effects and instruments. And I'm dying already. Help me out. What's going on here? Should we start at the top?
Well, let's start at the top. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first thing I've got there is I've got a navigation track there, and I just use that. I have that set up so that on my numbered keypad on my keyboard, I can set markers there, and I can zoom around projects really quickly.
We've got
So that's
one,
yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 marker tracks. Help me out here. Why do we need 7?
It's all well, it's all about staying organized. So underneath that, I've got my hit points. So basically, I put markers there to let myself know where there's something important that's happening in the picture. So, you know, at the where the music starts, the main title, yeah, where I might bring in the first theme for one of the main characters. So I've got Corinne's theme coming in there. So I've got everything mapped out of what I might try and hit with the music, and whether that's you know, a chord change or an instrumentation change or changing the orchestration a little bit. It's important to map out scenes before you begin.
Okay,
so that's what I use.
And you're doing this, you're mapping this stuff out just to picture. There's nothing, like there's no music in your session at that point yet? Is that what's happening, or?
Yeah, this is all before I write a single piece of music.
Wow. Okay. And underneath all this stuff, we've got like a bazillion time signature changes. And, you know, I played jazz fusion in my youth, so I'm okay with a lot of time signatures. But man, 4/4 to 5/4 to 4/4 to 6/8 to 4/4 to 6/8. Tell me what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about trying to hit changes. So it's part of the craft of film scoring is you have to know how to be able to write a 5/4 bar without making it stand out too much, and you know, if you're able to do a 6/8 bar. Part of these are also suggested by the picture. So for example, in the first cue that I've provided there's a moment where the two of the characters are dancing. Well, 6/8 or a waltz
That's right here.
is a very common style of composition that you can use for people that are dancing. So when this moment came up in the main titles, I thought, well, maybe I should try and have something waltzing or playing in the background for the characters to waltz to. So that's why I kind of used that 6/8 in that moment.
I was a pretty good dancer when I was young, but I've never danced in 6/8 to 5/4 within a.
Yeah, well, again, it's going from dancing to the characters are suddenly outside to back to dancing. You have to be able to write in all sorts of different ways.
And just so you guys know, we were able to get this is from an actual picture. Correct, Kevin? This is like an actual thing that's been released. Okay, just so you know, we had to get permission to use this. We couldn't get permission to use the pictures, otherwise we would have the video in here with it. But so you'll just have to suspend your imagination and imagine these things. But before we go through any more of this stuff, should we listen to something? Can we listen to this?
Yeah.
So this is the main title. As it says here. Now talk to me about main titles. Like that's the main title is where you get to show off, correct?
Yeah. This movie or this music's from a film called Let's Meet Again on Christmas Eve, and it came out on Lifetime USA last winter. And it's basically about two college sweethearts that make a promise to meet again on Christmas Eve, hence the title. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So the story focuses on how these two characters serendipitously meet up again and rekindle that love. Now, getting into the main titles are really important for the score, because that's where you can introduce a lot of your material, and you tell the viewer what the film's going to be about, when the film might be taking place, what is the film going to be telling them, whether it's happy or sad or magical, or whatever emotions you might want to tell the viewer. And you really want to get those themes in their heads so that you can utilize those themes throughout the rest of the film.
Cool. And typically there's no dialogue in the main title, correct? Like you just...
Typically not. However, there is a voiceover in this film. And that was a little bit more unique, but at the same time, I was still able to be fairly thematic with the music that I used.
Okay, cool. So let's have a listen to this. I'm going to leave it sort of expanded here so you can sort of see like when it changes to 5/4 here, and Corinne's theme changes to 4/4. First Sight is here. The dancing that Kevin was talking about happens in bar 22 here, where it goes to 6/8. And and just so you know, because I don't have all these Vienna Ensemble Pro instruments, this is just audio that Kevin rendered out for us. But let's have a listen to this, and maybe we can follow along with some of these markers and the time signature changes. Here we go. Oh man, love it. Such nice work. One of the things, for me, just having the privilege of getting to see Kevin's session is just, I always had this thing in my head about people just sitting down and composing, and all the time changes were just compositional things. And, this really helps me understand, how there's a real structure to this. Maybe comment on that, but also, is there anything else that you want to illuminate with the main title here?
Sure, yeah. I often think of film scoring as it's similar to a puzzle. You're very much given maybe the time that the music comes in and goes out, and what it needs to do, and maybe some moments that the music needs to hit. and some thematic material that you want to feature. And so it's very much like fitting in pieces into a puzzle that needs to serve that overall picture. One other standard trope that I use there, if you zoom in again, was on the time cut. For anyone who is listening, there's a modulation. Marker 5. There's a modulation into marker 5 to signify that time cut, and that's a standard trick that composers use to let the audience know that time has passed.
Okay, let's check that out. So here we go. I'll do one of these when we get to 5 if you can't see it on the screen. Nice, amazing. I also particularly appreciate when it goes to the slow motion, and you've had this pretty prominent ostinato going through the whole da 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 thing, and then we go to slow motion, and it sort of transforms into, it's still there kind of, but in a much quieter thing, and the marker says slow motion, so it sort of suspends time a little bit. Let's have a listen to that as well.
Exactly.
Sorry, did you want to say something about that before play?
Oh, no, that was
okay,
perfect.
Let's play it. And it sounds like it's a pit string or something, but it just sort of...
Yeah, I think it's it's a harp and a guitar, I think, that are still keeping that beat, and that it's important. One of the things that film music is supposed to do is it's supposed to move along the story. So, it's very important to either have kind of an ostinato or some kind of a motor or something helping to keep time and move the film along.
So how do you come up with the ostinatos? Because there's a very distinctive kind of film thing. Is that with ostinatos? Are there sort of cliches that people tend to use, or does it come from the melody? Like, where do these things come from?
Well, I think if you start with your melody and you build your orchestration and your instrumentation around that, then you can, if you start with your melody and then you've got your harmonic progression underneath, and then from your harmony, you can build your ostinato to make sure that that's kind of moving along. So, depending on the types of samples that you're working with, that can also sometimes, give you a direction as to what instruments you can use to move things along. So, the whole piece was really centered around kind of a repeating pattern that I had on the piano that I wanted to start out with. And I wanted to have that pattern kind of drive things along. But at the same time, you can't have that throughout the whole thing. You need to be able to change things up. And you want to have the music not only support the picture, but if it can stand on its own too, then that's mission accomplished.
Very cool. Do you mix your own work? Like do you send this stuff out to be mixed, or?
I do. I work with some wonderful mixing engineers that save me a lot of time and bring my production up the next level. It's important for me when I have 13 days to turn around a film, to not be putting in tons and tons of time on the mix. I want to let people who are dedicated to that bring things up and to really make the score shine.
And I'm assuming that a lot of these mix people that you're using, they specialize in film mixing. Like they don't mix rock and roll. Like these are film mix people. Is that fair to say, or?
They're definitely much more familiar with film mixing. There's almost a different breed of mix engineer that you need to seek out when you're looking for someone to mix your scores. They need to be cognizant of the time crunch that they might be under. They need to be aware of the sound that you're going for, so if you reference a specific score, they can figure out, okay, the piano is a little more present in this versus, something more electronic where you might have a more atmospheric approach to mixing that. And then they also have to be able to deliver in stems. So actually, what you see in front of you are those stems that are delivered to the dub engineer, or the mixing stage.
All this stuff, yeah. Cool. Let's get to some of these questions here, because Derek's relates to mixing and mastering. From Derek, interested in how the dynamic range works and differs from mixing and mastering music for streaming services. Also, the mastering process in general around this stuff. So I guess he's trying to translate his work with songs into how it might relate to this. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, well, for one thing, when my engineers are delivering the music, they will deliver everything in stems as well as a 2-mix or a stereo mix, and sometimes they'll deliver a 5-1 mix. So that's important to know. Also, the levels that everything are at. Film score is mixed a lot lower than you would a CD or something on Spotify or iTunes. So I think, I want to say it's like at least 8 to 12 decibels under unity gain when you're delivering this stuff. Because ideally, if the dub engineer, or also known as the mixing engineer, is able to take your music and to place it in the film, and if they don't need to touch a thing, I mean, that's a job well done.
Awesome. So as the composer, when you're because you deliver these as audio stems as well, right? Like, you don't send the session. So, like, what kind of levels are you looking for when you're outputting your stems? Are you mindful of levels when you output the stems, or?
Yeah, I mean, basically, so that nothing's clipping. I mean, thankfully, with digital audio, you're able to have a wide dynamic range without adding a lot of noise to things. So, usually I'm trying to make sure that it's not peaking. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is when you're writing this music, orchestration is what you use for dynamics, not necessarily just cranking up the volume on something. So if there's a moment where you can get big with something, then the orchestration is going to get a whole lot denser. It's not just turning up the amp on a guitar. You have to keep in mind how big your orchestration and your writing is for different moments.
Kevin changed my life in his conception on bottom end, low sub-frequencies, which we're getting to should we save that for the third cue here, Kevin, I think?
Let's save that for the third cue.
That was where my life has changed with this third cue. But this next one, everything in the first cue was all MIDI, correct? Those were all MIDI instruments?
Yeah, everything in the first cue is MIDI.
In this cue, there's a real instrument, which leads me to the question, like, how much of your scores typically has MIDI versus actual people playing instruments live?
Yeah, I mean, on films that don't have a huge budget for recording, you often have to just use sampled instruments and mock things up to make them sound as realistic as you can. That being said, if you're able to add on 1 or 2 live musicians, it brings up your production level quite a bit. And that's exactly what I did with this next cue. I wanted to bring on a buddy of mine who played sax and just let him have fun and add his own musicianship to the cue. And it brought it up to a level that I would not have been able to achieve very easily just mocking it up with sampled instruments.
Okay, and we're about to change seasons here. We need to suspend, that you had shorts on a couple of days ago, and we have to travel to December on this one. Is that correct, Kevin? Okay. Yeah. Merry Christmas, everyone. Nice brush programming there, man. That sounds great.
Yeah, I can't imagine how long that would take me to.
Yeah, those sound pretty darn real to me. Okay, so you have a collection of, because you work on a lot of Christmas movies, you have a collection of these
Yeah.
things? Is it?
I keep a DAW session of all the Christmas music that I've written for every single Christmas film, because at some point they're going to need a rendition of Jingle Bells or Deck the Halls or whatever it may be, and when you've got 65 minutes of music to write, you don't want to be rewriting every single time you're doing a Christmas tune that's playing on the radio, for example. So I'll have this DAW session set up, and I'll basically look for a song that gives the energy that I want to give to the scene. I'll bring in all those MIDI stems, I'll reorchestrate it, and I'll arrange it properly for the scene. I might change the key or whatever it may be. And then on this one, I was lucky enough to bring in a live saxophone player and just let him have some fun on this one.
Very cool. Well, it sounds great, and the first time I heard it, I didn't think all that stuff was programmed. I thought the bass and the drums were a real person. So well done on that. Let's take another question from Devin. How much do you rely on project templates when you're scoring? Do you have particular VSTs preloaded, or do you start from scratch depending on the project? Well, why don't you talk, and why don't I scroll through this ridiculous, so many things here, man.
Yeah, I do have a template set up. It basically contains the standard orchestra that you'd have, all the percussion, the rhythm section, sometimes choir, but not too often. And then I'll augment that template with specific instruments or samples or sounds that I've recorded to make sure that I'm tailoring everything to each project. I can't tell you how important having a properly set up template is. It saves you a ton of time, and you need to have everything routed properly and set to the appropriate stems so that you can do things quickly, because you just don't have the time to constantly be building new templates and bringing in new instruments all the time.
Guys, ladies and gentlemen, look at all these instruments. This is crazy. Sorry.
Now, it seems crazy, but I have a few tricks that I use to keep everything organized well. Basically, I'm using 2 or 3 shortcuts. One that hides every single track that I've got. One that only shows the tracks that have MIDI data on them. And then I use the nice Command F function on the keyboard, and I'll type in the instrument that I want to select. Because what I'm able to do with that is I'm able to look at what appears to be a blank template and really think about the instrumentation that I want to use. And then I can pull up that instrument without actually having to scroll through every single VST that I've got.
One of the things that was remarkable for me about Kevon's template here was all these group tracks that are listed here, and in particular these group tracks called depth, and of course effects. I mean, more than you'd see probably in a standard pop mix, but then beyond that, we go down to the bottom here, and we got a bunch of holy instruments, Batman. We got a bunch of VCA tracks down here. So can you talk about groups, Kevon, and
Sure.
in particular the depth groups, and then the VCAs? Because my initial thing was, man, why do you need groups and VCAs, and what is depth, and it's just a lot of things.
So basically, the depth tracks that I have set up are just a quick way for me to put instruments either further back in the room or closer to the listener, whatever may be required. And they've just got some very simple EQ and width adjustments on them so that things sound a little bit darker or a little bit further back and maybe not so wide. Whereas, something that you might have playing up in the front might be, your band playing in front of the piano, playing in front of the strings, playing in front of the winds and the brass and the percussion and your choir. So it's important to be able to create that illusion of depth.
So what are you using for the
when you're making
width
these
thing,
mock-ups.
Kevin? Like you're not just panning. Like you're using a plugin to sort of channel.
Yeah, I use a plugin. Yeah, I use a plugin called Panagement, and it's a great little VST that helps to move things back in terms of depth and in terms of EQ. It's got its own tilt and width functions if I really want to do that. But you can also do that through using your combined panner and Cubase to bring in things. To bring in maybe the strings to 90% instead of 100. To bring in maybe your percussion to 50, so that you still got width and you've got everything in its place, but you don't want to sound like you're actually in the orchestra. So that's basically why I've got those depth channels set up. And from there, I've got my group tracks. From there, I've got my group tracks set up, and they're basically for stemming. So if I want to stem out the winds or the brass or the percussion, you've got your percussion set up there. I could easily go in and stem those out.
So these groups for stemming, like the faders just live at 0, and all you use them for is just to bounce the stems to go to mix. That's all they're there for. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and then I've got the VCA tracks, and the reason that I use the VCA tracks is because when you're creating your template, you need to make sure that every instrument in each group, for example, in the woodwind section, needs to be balanced against each other. But what happens if you want to bring up the woodwind section without affecting those stem levels? Well, that's where the VCAs come in, where they allow you to bring up everything in a particular section that remains balanced against each other without affecting your stemming tracks.
Amazing. Very cool. I think we've arrived at the big one, Kevin. The moment of reckoning, as it were. Ladies and gentlemen, party people, this is a life-altering concept for a song guy like me. Talk to me about bottom end and sub frequencies and bass before we listen to the third cue here.
Yeah, so one of the tricks I like to use when I want the audience to really feel something is I'll bring in just a hint of a sub bass. Whether that's a sine tone or that's something with a little bit more frequencies in the upper end. I basically like to reserve that portion of the frequency spectrum for when I want extra emphasis. Often films in kind of the romantic comedy genre don't make a whole lot of use out of that really low tone. Now, that's not to say that you won't have instruments down low, like you'll have the strings down low. You might have, an upright bass going like I had in the previous cue that we played, but sometimes I just like to add that extra oomph to a cue for those really pivotal moments by adding in a bit of a sub frequency to things.
So how I translated that is, we tend to, as a song person, I tend to think about the density of the arrangement or just the intensity of the arrangement or the intensity of the part. But I guess maybe I hadn't thought about starving other parts of the song of specific frequencies for effect, and man, this changed my world. And actually I'm working on a pop song right now and I'm saving the bass for the bridge, and man,
You gotta save the
man,
bass.
it's so good. So thank you, Kevin. That you've changed my life.
Hey, happy to share.
Anyway, this is a beautiful piece of music. Do you have anything to set it up? This is True Love.
Yeah, this is the final piece of the movie. You know, it's the climax. The two sweethearts get together at the end of the film. Spoiler alert. Um, and this is kind of leading up to where they embrace at the very end of the film. Um, it starts out fairly lonely, where the characters are separate, and the emotions are a little bit more quiet and subdued. Um, there's some dialogue, so I had to stay out of the way of that and make sure that things didn't get too big too soon. And then, you know, you've got to hit the viewer with the feels when it's appropriate. So when the two lovers embrace, you've gotta really hit that
Okay,
moment.
and since we've already given spoilers, like when do we hear the sub? Like, did you? This is the device in this one, right?
Yeah, so I use it at two moments in this cue. The first is when Corinne, who's the main character in the film, realizes that Rob, her sweetheart, uh, did remember to keep that promise. And then the second moment that I use the sub for is when they embrace at the end, and the camera pans out, and we have the snow falling and the magical Christmas lights twinkling in the background.
And just so you guys maybe can hear a little bit of what I was hearing the first time I heard this, and after we had spoken about this, the high frequency content in it doesn't actually change a whole lot, does it, Kevin? Like from throughout the piece to the very end. But what happens when he drops that low sub thing in? Is it not only you feel the depth of the low, but it feels like the high gets higher somehow, and oh man, it's so exciting. Anyway, why don't we have a listen? Oh man, that's a beautiful piece of music.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for that. Should we take some questions? I don't know if anyone else has any questions. Let's, JG, what do you got there? Let's have a little quick look through here. Derek says, I don't know how you survived making stems without the new export functionality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Mr.
You see that couch back there behind me? That's not just for show.
Nice. And Bucky Cromwell, also known
Lucky
as
buddy.
CBG, he says you're a bleeping genius. So back to the hockey thing for a second. For those of you that like a little hockey, what are we going to call his Dear Pomo, Chris's Dear Pomo thing? It's a little controversy. It's a little hockey controversy. Chris on his socials has a Dear Pomo column where he tells Paul Maurice
He's got some sage
yeah,
advice.
he's a smart. He's not only a smart, artist development, songwriter, producer, artist, all the hats guy. He's a pretty darn smart hockey man too. So, yeah.
He's a good player too.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to experience that, but I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna see you guys, and we're gonna play hockey.
Bring your skates.
And we're gonna make music, and we're gonna geek out on Cubase. I can't wait to come out.
Sounds like fun.
But in any case, do you have any parting words, Kevin? Before it doesn't look like there's any more questions. I think you've answered most of everything. Oh wait, do you know Gina? Gina Kennedy?
I do know Gina.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Okay, so this is like small world moment. Like Devin, who asked the template, is married to Gina. These are two of my good friends, and I'm talking to you, and they're here, and oh man, this is like, this is so much fun. So much fun. I'm so selfish right now, but it's just so much fun for me.
She's a great
Yeah,
musician. In her own
absolutely.
right.
Yeah, Dina's a tremendous Yamaha artist, and she does voiceover work and plays with Devin and Altered by Mom and a whole bunch of other bands. And
Yeah, they're good too.
very good. Check out their 52 song year last year. They released a song, not only wrote but released a song a week last year, so that was pretty cool. Maybe we can get Devin back before too long. Anyway, Kevin, do you have any parting words of advice or wisdom on all of this stuff?
Yeah, well, all I'd say is, the next time you're watching a movie, just pay attention a little bit more to the music, and just pay attention to how it feels, because that's ultimately the end goal, is to make the audience feel something.
Okay. I would like to thank you, Kevin, for giving us of your time so generously.
My pleasure.
You are a genius, as Bucky said, and a wealth of insight and inspiration for me, but I'm sure for everyone else that was watching. And I do have a parting gift for you. I wanted to make sure that we made sure that we ended the night appropriately, and I would like to send this to you so that you can cheer for the appropriate team going forward.
Oh.
And
I'd have to watch myself during that.
And I was hoping that the score was here so I could tell you that we're winning, but it's a commercial right now, so I can't even tell you the score.
Yeah.
So it's probably best that we get off of this before we know what the score is.
Yeah, I gotta go watch.
Because I've had so much fun, and I don't want my team playing terribly to ruin this wonderful night. So anyway, thank you, Kevin. Please go and see his movies and listen to his work. I know you'll enjoy it. I know you've all seen it at Christmas anyway, but check it out again now that you've met Kevin. Hopefully the music sounds even better than it did before. I'm going to roll that Vienna Ensemble Pro video. It's about 10 minutes long if you want to hang out but it's worth it because it's a very, very cool piece of software. So anyway, thanks for coming out. We'll see you next month. We're working on special guests. We got another one in a couple months, but I'm going to keep that as a secret for right now. Thanks for coming out, you guys. We'll see you next time.
Vienna Ensemble Pro has become the professional solution in studios and production facilities around the world. This mixing and hosting application enables you to set up multi-computer networks with both Macs and PCs without the need for an additional audio interface. All you need is a simple Ethernet cable connection. Even when using only one computer, Vienna Ensemble Pro improves your workflow dramatically, with unique functions such as Preserve, which keeps all your plugins, samples and effects loaded while switching from one project to another. It's a huge time saver. In Vienna Ensemble Pro, you can load Vienna Instruments, Vienna Instruments Pro, Vienna Synchron Player, Vienna Synchron Pianos, and all your favorite third-party plugins as VST and audio unit plugins. You can mix in both stereo and surround up to 7.1 with full parameter automation, and you can read the full and clear names of all automatable parameters available in Vienna Ensemble Pro and all loaded plugins. A useful tool is Learn. By clicking on L, Vienna Ensemble Pro is waiting for what you want to map to control the selected parameter with in your automation. It also offers optional integration with Vienna Mir Pro with a single click. Plus, with the included 73GB Epic Orchestra 2.0, you have a powerful all-in-one production tool to get started right away. So in many music productions around the world, Vienna Ensemble Pro is an integral part of the workflow. You can choose to use one instance or multiple instances based on how you want to organize your virtual instruments. For each instance, you have up to 48 MIDI ports available, with 16 MIDI channels each for a total of 768 MIDI channels. You can choose how many MIDI ports and audio channels you want to use for each instance in the preferences. In Vienna Ensemble Pro 7, a selection of 8 powerful effects plugins has been integrated, based on Vienna Suite Pro, all with a graphical user display integrated into the mixer channel strip. Once you've set up your project, you can decide to disable the entire Vienna Ensemble Pro instance or individual instrument channels to save resources. This allows you to load a whole project or individual instances very quickly, and you can even automate activation and deactivation. Connecting the Vienna Ensemble Pro server to your sequencer is straightforward. Load the Vienna Ensemble Pro plugin and connect it to an existing instance. Do the same for any additional instances or create a new instance from within the Vienna Ensemble Pro plugin. From now on, every time you save the project, your sequencer will also save all the data available in Vienna Ensemble Pro. And this way you can speed up loading all virtual instruments with just loading the project in your sequencer. If auto-saving projects with many virtual instruments slow down your workflow, you can decouple the save function of Vienna Ensemble Pro by clicking these icons. The icon on the left disables saving of this connected instance only. If you click the icon on the right, you disable saving for all linked instances. Of course, when you finish the work before closing the song in your sequencer, you can uncheck decouple to save the project, including the whole configuration of Vienna Ensemble Pro. In Vienna Ensemble Pro, you can also save the entire project and individual instances directly. Each channel strip can also be saved by right-clicking on it so that you can recover the channel strip with its virtual instruments in any other project. The plugins and virtual instruments that you use the most can be added to your favorites by opening the preferences, and this will allow you to find them quickly when you load them in Vienna Ensemble Pro. With all Vienna Symphonic Library products, the articulation in use is displayed right on the channel strip. So you could check in real time if particular articulations are maybe too loud or too soft. You can create a folder to group channels for a better overview with the right mouse button or by clicking on the icon below. When right-clicking the channel strip, you have several options. Change the color, rename, disable or copy the channel settings. Save and load a channel strip with the virtual instruments loaded in it with all its articulations, and duplicate or delete certain channels. With insert input from your sequencer, you can send the signals of your audio tracks to Vienna Ensemble Pro and mix them there. Some of these items are also visible by right-clicking below or above the channel strips. You can send the signal to a bus and create groups, deciding what to see simultaneously. You can balance or use Power Pan to position the virtual instrument, use Sense and Insert Effects plugins, disable the player, and exchange it for another plugin. In the taskbar, you have several icons that help you to understand which functions you can access quickly, from deactivating the whole project to muting the sound. And you can send a play signal to your sequencer in VE Pro by clicking the play symbol or using the spacebar. And these icons will create a new project, open and save existing projects. The gear icon opens the preferences, and the icons in the lower left corner are dedicated to open Vienna Instruments, Vienna Instruments Pro, Vienna Synchron Player and Vienna Synchron Pianos, depending on which players you have installed. The next icon in the top bar is Learn. After you have activated it and you have pressed the spacebar to send a play signal to your song, Vienna Ensemble Pro will learn which samples are used in all loaded Vienna players. After finishing the playback of your song, click the next icon, Optimize, to delete all unused samples of all Vienna players from RAM. If you then need to restore the previous state and reload all the samples into your RAM, click the Reset button. The tuning settings affects all loaded Vienna plugins. With the A icon, you open the assignment window for parameter automation, and with the icon for MIDI activity focus, Vienna Ensemble Pro will display the instrument you are currently using automatically for you. The Mir and Mir X icons are available if you own a license for Mir Pro or Mir Pro 24. As soon as you insert another channel, the instrument will be placed directly in Mir Pro. The Mir X mode will only be helpful if you have purchased at least one of the venues you see in this list. Mir X is a handy tool to position your virtual players very quickly, speeding up your workflow. You can turn off keyboard shortcuts and unsnap instances from the main window to make them float freely. And as we saw at the beginning of the video, the Padlock Preserve icon allows you to close projects from your DAW without losing the instance in Vienna Ensemble Pro. And this allows you to switch from one project to another without the need to reload any instances. The next icon lets you decouple instances from your sequencer, as we've mentioned before. You can also find all these functions in the menu above. Once Vienna Ensemble Pro is installed, you will see multiple available applications. Vienna Ensemble Pro Server is the version that allows you to connect Vienna Ensemble Pro to your sequencer. And if you're a live musician, then opening the standalone version of Vienna Ensemble Pro will allow you to play your virtual instruments with a MIDI keyboard or additional controllers directly inside of Vienna Ensemble Pro standalone. Most of our users work with Vienna Ensemble Pro Server for the improved workflow because of its stability and, of course, because of all the benefits you get from the increased performance in your sequencer. As computers are becoming faster and faster, you can now purchase single licenses of Vienna Ensemble Pro. And if you work with multiple networked computers, then additional licenses are available for a significantly reduced price. You can also download a keyless demo version without the need for an eLicense USB key. For any further information, please visit the Vienna Ensemble Pro 7 product page on vsl.co.at. And if you have any questions, get in touch with us via support@vsl.co.at or leave a comment below.